at Junction 11 at Chertsey. That's following an accident, and there are delays back to Junction 12 at the M3. Also, problems on the South Circular Road in both directions to Tulse Hill. Very busy because of the temporary traffic lights, but especially westbound where the queue goes back to West Dulwich Station. On the North Circular Road southbound, a lorry's broken down at the A12 junction, so that's slow on the approach. And on the A13, the westbound exit slip road at the Lodge Avenue junction stays closed because of an ongoing investigation, and there are delays back to Ferry Lane.
This is LBC.
Every face cover.
Now 0345 6060 973 LBC.
What does
Nick Ferrari at breakfast on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 9 minutes before 8, and we'll get back to our conversation about AstraZeneca in just a moment. But let's look at something you're going to hear later from the Prime Minister today, a year-long review hailed as the most radical assessment of this country's place in the world since the end of the Cold War. It's looked at all aspects and conclusions of an integrated, I've got it now, review of security. And it's worked out that while China is the biggest threat to Britain's prosperity, Russia is the most acute threat to UK security. Let's work this through now with Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who joins me now. Thank you very much for coming on, Secretary of State. Can you tell me then, let's go to prosperity first. Why? Why the concerns over China? Good morning.
Good morning. Well, look, China's a massive growing power. It's here to stay. Of course, there are issues around 5G, telecoms and security that we've looked at, and you'll be well known to you and your listeners. But we also know that we're going to keep trading and want investment where it can be done safely and securely. So there are other areas and issues with China. We need to engage with China on climate change if we're going to shift the dial on what's a global challenge. Equally, there are challenges like Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and we're clear we're going to stand up for our values. The integrated view knits all of these things together, obviously not just for China, but for the whole world, looks at the huge comparative advantages we have, tech, science, trade, looks at the strengths that we have, the ingenuity and the innovativeness of our people, and how we strengthen those assets and make and create and take the opportunities that will create the high-paid jobs, but also defend our security for a generation.
But you'll be aware, Foreign Secretary, you'll have colleagues who will express concerns over China, its position with its treatment of the Uyghur Muslims, and also their concerns over Huawei. How can you address all of those, Mr. Raab?
Well, on 5G, we've been very clear in the approach that we're taking, and we will not do anything that allows our infrastructure to be eroded or breached. And in relation to Xinjiang, I don't think any country has spoken up in the Human Rights Council, in the UN, and you can see in the leadership that we've taken as a G7 on human rights and on China, including Xinjiang, but also Hong Kong.
And Russia, let's talk about the threat to national security. Why is it that we should still turn our eyes cautiously towards Russia?
I think if you look at everything from the use of Novichok in relation to Alexei Navalny, the leading opposition figure, we suffered from that similar Novichok attack on the streets of Salisbury. So Russia's threat in terms of using nefarious weapons is still there. Its use of misinformation and its attempt to sow chaos amongst democracy by spewing out baseless propaganda. Its use of cyber to attack countries. We've seen cyber attacks on vaccine research by Russia, which we've called out in the past. So China is, of course, a lot of the focus, and there are many other countries and many other regions, but we can't take our eye off the ball from the Russian threat.
Which all makes it very interesting that this new refit of the Downing Street press briefing room along the style of a sort of White House image has been carried out by a Russian company. Couldn't we find a British company, Foreign Secretary?
Oh, well, it's interesting, Nick. We're not saying that we've got a problem with the Russian people or the Chinese people. Indeed, if you look at, for example, on the Chinese front, the British-Chinese community make an incredible contribution here. And we're not saying all businesses from either of those two countries are bad. Far from it. We want to be an outward, open-looking country. And of course, in relation to any government contracts, we want to get the best value for money. And yes, of course, the big emphasis on buying British, but ultimately we want to get the best value for taxpayers' money. But
it doesn't strike you as odd, as you quite rightly identify some of the issues that we've had with Russians, that the company that's been used, while it's not part of the government, has worked in the past for Russia Today, the state-controlled broadcaster, and they're now fitting out the number 10 press briefing room. You don't see this as a strange decision?
No, I think if they're engaged in interior design, Nick,
and all the other kit, computers and comms, as it's called.
Any of that stuff, as you'd expect, will be very carefully checked by our own authorities. So I'm not worried about that for a second.
Why couldn't we get a British company lastly on this?
Well, I think rightly many of your listeners, of course, would like to see British companies.
This is a great pinnacle of British achievement. The British Prime Minister with the Union flag behind him, and others. I'm sure we'll see you there, Foreign Secretary. We may see Priti Patel, and brought to a waiting nation through Russian technology. What does that say about Great Britain?
Well, it won't be Russian technology.
It's all Russian chemists. All been fitted out by Megahertz, a Moscow-based firm. All the technical
I think in the typically wonderfully mischievous way, you're eliding various things. But the reality is we're an open, outward-looking country. We want foreign direct investment where it's safe, where it can be done without risk to our own country or dirty money making its way into this country. But that is part of our shtick, our USP as Global Britain. And that's one of the ways that we'll project power through the force of our economy, strength of our attractiveness in the world, coupled with everything that we do abroad, from trade to security to our aid budget and our development policy, as a force for good in the world. And all of that is important for Britain, both in terms of creating the jobs of the future, allowing our startups to scale up by exporting to all of these other countries, but also being a force for good and solving some of the international challenges from climate change to this pandemic, as we've already seen with the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Writing in the Times today on other matters, the Prime Minister talks about the need to get the whole world, or certain, vaccinated. So we turn to issues in Europe, and if you allow that none of us are safe until we're all safe, how concerned should we be that a growing number of countries, for strange reasons, seem to be pressing pause on the AstraZeneca jab? Mr. Raab.
Well, every country will have a regulatory approach that will want to check any issues that arise either through trials, as we've done with allergic reactions, right the way through to the rollout. But what is crystal clear from the evidence that we've got, and obviously we've had a substantial rollout and our own regulator, is that there is no risk from this vaccine. Indeed, people should take the vaccine because it is saving lives. That is backed up by the EU regulator, which says there's no evidence that would justify suspending rollout of the AstraZeneca vaccine, and it's backed up by the World Health Organization. So we respect other countries going through their processes, but the message is crystal clear. This vaccine is safe and people should take it.
To other broadcasters, you talked about lessons needed to be learnt from the events at Clapham Common over the weekend and the subsequent fallout. Lessons in what area, Mr. Raab?
Well, the Met have already instigated a review in terms of the policing of the vigil that took place and some of the concerning scenes we saw there. The Her Majesty's Independent Inspectorate of Constabulary will also look at the lessons learned. I think it's right that they do that. I think the police have got a devilishly difficult job to do at the moment because, of course, they need to prevent social mixing in large numbers because of the risk from the virus, and they've, I think, handled that by and large exceptionally well over the last year. But of course, we're a proud country with a tradition of freedom of speech and peaceful protest, and it's tricky to get the balance right. But I think overwhelmingly they have. But of course, when we have cases like the vigils for Sarah Everard, a terrible case that we all feel piercingly bad about, I think it's right that they look and see what lessons should be learned.
I've no idea whether you're a betting man, Foreign Secretary, but you're probably aware that Cheltenham Festival starts today. Knowing what we know now, how calamitous a decision was it to allow Cheltenham to proceed with around 250,000 racegoers last year?
Look, we take the decisions on the best evidence that we've got at the time, and we learn the lessons, as we've undoubtedly done through this pandemic. People can look back with the benefit of hindsight, but all the government can do is distill up, and the scientific evidence is often contested, get it explained to us clearly, look at what the consensus view is, and take the advice and follow it as best we can. That's the approach we've taken right the way through. Of course, there are lessons to be learned, but let's not also lose sight of the things that we've got right. Principally among them is the vaccine and the vaccine rollout, which took a huge amount of investment and some brave calls by the Prime Minister early on in this pandemic.
But nothing but a triumph for British scientists and the British military and the NHS and the army of volunteers. I'm absolutely with you on the vaccine. But just coming back finally to Cheltenham, it was a mistake. We can say that now, can't we? That we allowed that to go ahead. Around 250,000 people attending Cheltenham over the festival. That, candidly, Mr. Raab, now we know was a mistake.
I think we're learning lessons all the way, and we'll have a proper lesson.
Can you not say the word mistake, Mr. Raab?
No, I'm saying I'm recognising that there of course be lessons learned. I'm just saying that right now, as we're in the middle of this vaccine rollout, all attention and focus is on getting that completed because that's what will save lives. But for sure, there'll be a moment afterwards where we want to look back in the round and see what we got right, what we got wrong, and make sure we're stronger should, heaven forbid, there be a future pandemic on this kind of scale.
Grateful for your time today. Thank you, Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, appearing here on LBC, where 1 minute after 8 news is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, undercover police officers could patrol bars and nightclubs to prevent sexual harassment and assault. Ministers have announced steps to try to give women more reassurance